Welcome back. Under the auspices of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli launched on Wednesday Egypt's national strategy for intellectual property during a ceremony held in the new administrative capital. Over the phone, we have Dr. Nadia Zachary, former Minister of Scientific Research. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
How are you? Good morning, Doctor. So
Good
first of
morning,
all,
dear.
I would like to shed the light on the importance of this national strategy when it comes to the intellectual property.
Great. You know that the intellectual property is very important for the application of any scientific or work in the art, or any scientific research. It is very important to take the intellectual property so as to come out from the laboratory to the industry, or to make a good film or a good song or anything like that. So this intellectual property was offered by many ministries, like the Ministry of Scientific Research, the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of other ministries, the Ministry of Industry, and so on. And there were about 9 ministries offering this intellectual property, each in its field. Now all of them are gathered together in a single national strategy for intellectual property that will be under the office of President el-Sisi and the Prime Minister, Dr. Mustafa Madbouli. So this will make it easier to take the intellectual property, and it's our aim to make awareness for the intellectual property through all the community, to know what is the importance of intellectual property, because many don't know about intellectual property, and we have to give them awareness about that.
So do we have certain principles for this?
Of course we have, and we have since many years ago, but it was given by many ministries, and this confused the people where to go and what to do and what are the laws for the intellectual property. But we had before the intellectual property, but as I told you, it was a sort of many ministries offer this intellectual property.
Doctor, can we say by this we are paving the way for legislative environment on IP and support for the digital transformation as well, and the sustainability in general?
Of course, because this high tech will help in taking the intellectual property in a shorter time, and this will let the people apply their thoughts, whether it is patents, whether it is a development of a certain machine, and so on. And I would like to tell you something which is nice, that yesterday Dr. Darren made a meeting with Dr. Maya Morsi and myself, and that was to make a sort of intellectual property, especially for women, and they chosen a certain group of women who are working in tele, to take the intellectual property in the field of tele to be an Egyptian intellectual property for these people all around the world. They can sell their products all around the world under the name of Egypt and under the intellectual property they will take.
Dr. Prime Minister Dr. Madbouli stressed the need to work on the production of electric car parts locally.
Yes.
So
yes.
How do you see this? Again, of course, taking into consideration, we're talking about the sustainability in all fields, and taking into consideration Egypt's vision for the year 2030.
Of course, it's very important to conserve the energy. And we have many inventions concerning the electrical cars, and this, again, we can say they can take the intellectual property in this field by developing certain engines in the cars to be electrically working. And this will be going on with 2030, the sustainable development in the field of energy at the 2030s.
What kind of cooperation, if we are talking about Egypt, you have also in this respect with WIPO?
The WIPO is the main agency offering the intellectual property, and it is the main agency that proposes the laws for the intellectual property. It is affiliated to the United Nations and it is present in Geneva. And we are cooperating with the WIPO since a long time, so we cannot make other rules which are not related to the WIPO. The rules are done for each country, but we are respecting the rules of the WIPO as well.
We're talking about the awareness of the intellectual property, and as you mentioned in the very beginning, so how important it is when we take this into consideration, for example, talking about the new generation, about promoting this awareness. We're talking about postgraduates, we're talking about university students, about all different categories. How important it is?
This is our objective, is to disseminate the knowledge concerning the intellectual property through the schools, through the universities, the undergraduates and the postgraduates, through the community, because it's not only for the scientific community, it is for all the community. They can apply for the intellectual property if they have something which is new. And I think that the young generation knows better than the old generation about the intellectual property, because we are always hearing these statements and the importance of the intellectual property, but we need more and more awareness about it and how they can apply for the intellectual property. How long does it take? Because some people feel that it takes a long time. This is an international method that takes a long time anywhere all over the world, not only in Egypt, because we have to study the novelty of the research or of the subject admitted to the intellectual property all over the world, that it has not been done all over the world. And after being sure that it is novel, then comes the scientific discussion between the one who is applying to the intellectual property and the experts who give them the okay to have the intellectual property.
And of course, this is going to be very, very important when we talk about its impact on the economic growth in Egypt.
Of course, this will be the route for developing the economy based on scientific research or based on new ideas, and we can manufacture our own technology, not only importing the technology from abroad.
Right. Doctor, talking about it, and also there were talks about documenting the history of food, for example, using this for an encyclopedia and others. Tell us more about it.
We have many things that we didn't take the intellectual property for it, like some of the heritage that we have to take the intellectual property to confirm that it is Egyptian. But unfortunately, we didn't have this knowledge to do it the past years. But we have to start from now to take the intellectual property for everything we have as heritage here in Egypt, also for the plants that we cultivate here in Egypt, for the invention, for many things we have to make intellectual property. You know, intellectual property gives the intellectual property for the patent, for the trademarks, and for the authors of songs, films, and books, and so on.
Can we say that it is also important for the idea of creating an environment conducive to innovation?
Yes, it is an environment for innovation, because, you know, we have many scientific researches, and in the field of publishing scientific research in international journals, we are among the first 17% worldwide, and this is a very good place. But if we look to the scientific research as a whole, we are not so good, because we don't apply the scientific research as it should be applied, and the intellectual property is the first step in the application of scientific research, because I cannot apply any scientific research and make small enterprises for it, except when I have the intellectual property. Otherwise, my vote will be stolen.
Right. I'd like also to talk about the agreements because Minister of Higher Education said that Egypt has been a member of the WIPO since 1975, as you mentioned, of course, in the beginning, and has signed 14 agreements administered by the organization.
Yes, we had a very long collaboration with the WIPO, and we used to give the intellectual property in Egypt only, but at 2012, we were able to give the intellectual property internationally by something which is called PTT. So Egypt was the first country to give the international intellectual property among Africa and the Arabian countries. So it is a long correlation between them. But what happened yesterday is connecting all the ministries and all the agencies which give the intellectual property in one agency under the auspices of the President, the Sisi, and the Prime Minister. And this will facilitate for the people to apply for the intellectual property.
So far, how do you see, if I'm talking in general, with all these developments taking place all around in Egypt in all domains? So how do you see Egypt today? And of course, I'm talking about this important event, whether I'm talking about the intellectual property or the track that we are following to achieve our goals.
It is the track to achieve the sustainable development, the development of 2030, because it's not only words to be written that we have to do. We are doing on the ground, like this strategy, like the collaboration between the WIPO and the National Council for Women, which happened yesterday, which is very great, because about 30% of the patents applied through the last 10 years were offered to women, either alone or women and men together. So it's very great, and I'm very happy for this agreement between the WIPO and the National Council for Women. Regarding all the steps we are taking, as you said, it is the track to reach the sustainable development by the year 2030.
Dr. Nadia Zachary, a former Minister of Scientific Research, thank you very much for joining us. Right, moving on to a quick break, then we'll be back.